Well, good afternoon. I appreciate you all for coming to attend the closing ceremony of the prestigious IBM Smarter Cities Challenge engagement that the City of Richmond has been working on this year. I'm Andreas Addison. I work in the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, Byron Marshall, and we are really proud to say that ever since the mayor came on board in 2010, we've been charged with trying to become a Tier 1 city, and by building a better Richmond to really overcome a lot of our challenges and issues as our cities faced. And through that, we started later that year, IBM came out with this idea of the Smarter Cities Challenge, addressing cities to ask them to submit their challenges they face from around the world. And through that focus, we saw this as a great opportunity to really focus on achieving our mission and vision of becoming a Tier 1 city. Through that pursuit, we've applied the last 3 years in attempts to try to find a way to get this partnership to come to Richmond to really kind of embrace what we have to offer and what we want to achieve. And through this effort, we applied this year in the fall along the topic of economic development. We want to focus on economic development, not just particularly because the business creation is an important need of any city, but because it includes so many different facets of which our community can become stronger. Through that, we saw areas in which we could focus on workforce development, education, transportation, our housing mix, and other issues that face a lot of our neighborhoods that are disparate from across our entire city. Through this project, we wanted to realize how can we incorporate all of our valuable resources from across our entire region to come together to really focus on how we can drive City of Richmond better and forward. So as we applied with the IBM Smarter Cities Challenge, we wanted to make sure we brought together some of the world-class talent, as you'll meet here, to really kind of come together to focus on how we can alleviate our situations and share this with the world. So through our challenge, we wanted to focus on economic development, particularly in neighborhoods that have been distressed, that were once thriving economic hubs, that we could see as the bones and skeletons of what we could create once again to be thriving neighborhoods again. Through that, we focus on Brooklyn Park Boulevard, 25th Street, 9 Mile Road Corridor, Midlothian Turnpike, as well as Hull Street. All these areas once held the vibrant communities and economic vitality that we once had back in the middle of the century, and since then have seen a lot of decay. Through that, we wanted to have the challenge of how to bring those together, how to make our city all-inclusively a better place to live, work, and play. So through that, the challenge has been handed off to the IBM consultants, and they've had a wonderful 3-week engagement, learning our city, meeting all departments, city leadership, and all the organizations we have throughout our entire community. So I'm proud to present to you the IBM consultant team, and I want to see what their accomplishments have been for the past 3 weeks. Sally?
Thank you, Andreas, and we are all going to miss you. We've been working very hard for the last 3 weeks. I'm Sally Scott Marietta. I've met many of you. Of course, I'm with IBM's Corporate Citizenship, which is the sponsor of this program. It is a philanthropic side of IBM. It's been for the last 3 years, 100 cities that we have donated both time, talent, and expertise of IBM executives from around the world. 400 cities applied for this, and there were 100. This is the last year of the program, and we're thrilled that we are here in Richmond. There were only 7 cities in the United States this year, and I'm proud that, of course, in my territory, which is the Commonwealth of Virginia, that Richmond was one of the recipients. It is my pleasure to have the team be able to present what we've been working on, but on behalf of myself, and then you'll hear from all of us, thank you very much for making this a very exciting experience, but also a learning experience for all of us at IBM. So Deenah Patel will be here. Thank you.
Sure, let's get it started.
Thanks, I'll be back.
Thank you. Deenah Patel from Toronto in Ontario, an IBMer. I'd like to begin with giving you a quick overview of what we plan to cover in the next moment of time. We'll give you a little snapshot of our team, many of you of which we've met, and some new friendly faces, give you a little bit of a background, and then give you our perspective of the challenge that we were asked to undertake. We'll highlight the approach that we've taken and the methodology that we've used, and in addition, share some of the highlights regarding the project recommendations. Of course, with a short amount of period of time, we'll give you the highlights and a report will be created. And then we'd like to have a discussion. So first, let's start with the team. A team of diverse IBMers from across North America, Canada, and the USA, from all different areas of our business, including the public sector, marketing and communications, IBM Global Finance, and we have a chief strategist on board, and a member of the Global Smarter Cities Challenge team. We came together, not knowing each other, on June 2nd to commence this project together, and through our collaborative skills, had an opportunity to work with you. Let's look at the problem, the challenge that was put in front of us. We understand, as Andreas has just shared with us, the goal of to build a better Richmond and to become a Tier 1 city. Understanding there are so many things underway, projects, programs, initiatives, revitalization, across everybody that we had a chance to meet with, and a true sense of pride and energy around rebuilding and strengthening Richmond. But the challenge still persists. There's history, there's systemic challenge, there's divide in the community based on generational, based on poverty, based on all of these multiple of dimensions. And all of these dimensions culminate and make for a challenging circumstance. So how do you actually propel forward? How do you get double-digit growth? How do you change the game? How do you change the notion of the challenges that Richmond faces? And as you can see, we've looked at specifically neighborhoods that were impoverished. So the challenge then was for us to understand this big ecosystem, the opportunity to, from an outside perspective, to look at the big picture and understand all of the dimensions that are underway in the city currently, and to look at that and say to ourselves, how do you improve neighborhood revitalization specifically? And that was our charge. And our goal, clearly, is to be able to provide you with some high-level recommendations, which we'll share with you today, areas where we think there may be opportunity to look at solutions, perhaps technology and approaches that will help with neighborhood revitalization overall. So that sets the tone for our discussion. As I move forward, I'll share with you the approach and methodology that the IBM team used. We first began with situational analysis. The comment here, and many of you had the chance to be a part of our listening tour. Over 7 business days, we had 33 different meetings, we met with over 105 individuals, talented individuals, highly motivated, and willing to share their perspectives. We learned firsthand from different areas of the business, whether it was your city and the business and the departments, whether it was business and venture capitalists, whether it was the community itself, not-for-profits, and the privilege to meet with universities and a college, to really hear firsthand about the circumstance, the situation in the neighborhoods. We then took our typical IBM problem-solving approach and used system thinking to be able to identify leverage points. And we'll be able to provide you with more detail as we go through this material, and key performance indicators that we believe are going to help change the game. We've developed recommendations, and you'll be hearing of that shortly from my colleagues. And then our final presentation today, an opportunity for us to share with you our initial findings, and we're also creating a full report that will be provided to the city, to the mayor. And that gives you an overview of how we approach this. Now I'm going to move on to Don, and he's going to give you an overview of what is systems thinking and how we've used that to keep moving forward.
Good afternoon. As Deenah mentioned, we took a very, what I'll call holistic approach to the project, and as you can imagine, in these neighborhoods that have been in a state of, in some cases, decline since their heyday in the 50s and 60s, there's been a lot of different factors that you could point to and say, you know, at any point in time, something that might have impacted, whether it's, you know, businesses or properties, etc. So at 3 o'clock here, you see our approach. And we decided very early on in the process that given the complexity of the issues that are at play here, that we were going to take what's called a systems thinking approach. Systems dynamics is an area of study kind of like biology or chemistry or math. It's a discipline. And it's a very good tool and methodology for looking at complex variables and complex systems, of which we think is certainly in play here in Richmond. So just to give you an example of a simple system, let's start here. All of us, hopefully most of us, have air conditioning in our homes and our workplaces, like we have a nice comfortable level here today. An air conditioning system is a great example of a simple closed loop system. You have, you know, various elements at work, the compressor, the condenser, the freon and the refrigerator, the refrigerant that flows through the system. It's a closed loop system, okay? Anytime you're looking at this from analyzing what's the best way to impact the system, you have to identify what we consider the key leverage point. And that's a term we're going to use ongoing throughout the presentation here. And the key leverage point in the air conditioning system, maybe it's obvious when you say it, it's the thermostat, right? You turn the thermostat down. If the system's working well, it gets cooler. You turn it up, it gets warmer, all right? Simple closed loop system, but the control point is the thermostat.
Now, one thing that we started piecing together after we were doing our analysis and gathering a lot of the information about the current situation in these neighborhoods is we started identifying something that we'll call a system of systems. There are various gears that are working in tandem that either leads to a state of underperformance, or if changed appropriately, can lead to a state of achievement and growth and performance, right? So the first sort of gear that we are looking at, and this is in line with the mayor's ongoing strategy to focus on improving and eradicating poverty in the city, is what we'll call the poverty cycle. Okay, and there are many factors that impact the poverty cycle, but at the end of the day, if you just had to distill it, it's things like employment, which impacts the poverty rate, and which impacts how many residents within the neighborhood are either above or below the poverty line. All right? Now, the thermostat in our analysis for the poverty cycle is something that we call median income levels. Now, by definition, if you're not making enough income, you're below the poverty line, right? If you're making enough income, you can move yourself above and out and out of poverty, right? So now the question is, what's the system that feeds poverty? Now, jobs creation is clearly a key feeder to either a positive or negative impact of the poverty cycle. If there are good paying jobs and enough jobs that people can apply for and get and work, they can make enough income and eventually they get out of poverty, right? So we started looking at what are those things that really drive the jobs engine, all right? And it's certainly factors like how many businesses. Businesses create jobs, right? Well, what creates businesses? Well, business has to have capital. Businesses have to have a place to put their business, available land. There are many factors behind this, okay? And we've got a more detailed view of the system, but we've distilled it into these few key ones just to help you understand, what are those key elements that are driving jobs. The second major driver for employment is education and workforce development. Are there enough skilled employees that can accept these jobs, right? And if you look at, the people in poverty in these neighborhoods, the question is, do they have the skills necessary to be employable, right? So you start peeling that back a bit, and you see that it's things like investment in education, mentoring and support, the formal training and development activities. So training effectiveness in this lower left is certainly a thermostat for education and workforce development. And then next, what about the role of government, right? The city government, many of the departments that you represent, certainly the role of government can have a positive or negative influence on poverty, right? Hopefully a positive influence. One of the ways that can occur is starting with a shared vision, and as the mayor has stated, a priority to make this a better system, right? It starts with vision and leadership. But then there are other elements, like how well do the processes align to that? Do they support business development in the neighborhood, right? And then an interesting factor that we came upon is as the jobs engine improves and the number of businesses grow, it actually generates revenue for the city. And as the poverty cycle improves, it actually reduces the cost of poverty to the city. And lo and behold, the ability for the city to invest in new things like economic development initiatives and growth. So there again is yet another subsystem here at work. And then finally, as we look at the end game of neighborhood vitality, this one's a little more intangible. It's hard to put your finger on what a vital neighborhood would be versus a non-vital neighborhood. But I think you know it when you see it. Cary Street is a great example of a place that over time has become a vital destination sort of neighborhood. People go there for dinner. People go there to shop. People go there to mingle. If that's an example of a vital neighborhood, how do you get there, right? Well, you have to be looking holistically, in our view, at all these sub-factors, right? As people move above the poverty line, we think there's a positive impact on the crime rate, right? As crime goes down, all of a sudden, if people understand that it's a real safe place to go, businesses start to think about locating there. People start driving there. Hey, let's go to this new place. right? And there's a role that the city can play through campaigns and other things to promote that public awareness. At the end of the day, what we determined was the key thermostat here in Vitality was something we call homeowner ratio. The mix between renters and owners. Okay, the owners, theoretically will take better care of their properties, have a pride of ownership, want to stay there, aren't necessarily just passing through. So, you net this out, there are 5 key variables that we've honed in on as major control points for either, continuing the state of underdevelopment or turning it around and turning these neighborhoods onto a path and a growth path of vitality. So next, Gary's going to take you through a framework of how some of these indicators can be improved and taken forward in terms of a improved process.
Thanks, Don. I just got to switch hands, sorry. So we realize that there's a lot more detail underlying this sort of structure that we've represented here, but it gave us the ability to sort of understand the factors that influence it. And we've got more backup that is in the detailed report. But once we got a sort of handle on a systems thinking approach like this one, we started to be able to generate a whole heap of recommendations, and we actually come out with 50 recommendations the first time we went through the process through discussing it. But what we quickly come to realize is that there was a common problem, or there was actually 2 common problems with all of the recommendations that we were moving to. And the common problem was the fact that, number one, we didn't have the data to back up the proposition that if you did this, it will fix that. And 2, even if we did put some action into play, how could we measure the success on driving economic development in the impoverished neighborhoods? So that led us to move to a different type of approach, and what we started looking at is trying to develop a performance framework. So the performance framework starts out with a whole heap of data, a lot of it fragmented, and it's across the city and across all of the stakeholders. There's a lot of relevant data in this. It's from studies, from surveys, from the scorecard that's already in place. Some of it is raw data, but other parts of it are actually KPIs. So the first step in building a performance framework is to turn this data into key performance indicators. And key performance indicators do 2 things. They drive action and they allow you to measure results. So, they sort of form back into the key levers that Don was talking about. Once you have identified the key performance indicators, you can start using those to develop a data-driven decision model. And this allows you to do what-if analysis and determine what the impact or predict what the impact of a certain action would be on the KPIs that are relevant to the topic. So creating the data-driven decision model allows you to focus actions, right? And actions will always support the strategy and the vision for the city. So this became one of the key recommendations from the IBM team. And I want to just give you a quick overview of what those recommendations are, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bob to go into a bit more decision. We sort of group the recommendations into 2 broad categories. The first one is enablers. And the first bit of the enabler is the smartest city decision system. This is the KPI creation, including how do you get the data, how do you update it on a regular basis, and how does it drive decisions in it. Once you have the basis of measuring actions and the success and being able to tweak those initiatives or programs that have been put in place to drive economic development, you need to realize that there's a whole heap of stakeholders involved in that program. So the second enabling recommendation from us is related to aligning all the stakeholders groups and implementing a change management program across all of the stakeholders so that each element of a key KPI or each element of an initiative that is across the city is under the umbrella of a true transformation program initiative. These 2 initiatives we believe are fundamental to enable the city to then move on to more specific recommendations. And what we've done is we've highlighted a couple that we think could have huge impact on the city. The first one is an evaluation of a number of tactical recommendations which we'll go into. And we've tried to tie these recommendations back to the key leverage points that Don was talking about. And lastly, we sort of wanted to chuck out a out-of-the-box thinking. And the last recommendation we had was around exploring whether social enterprise business models, which have been in play in Europe for a long time, since the 70s, and are starting to take up a lot across the US, and I've got some examples coming up about it, but whether that is a process whereby we can affect the KPIs and stimulate economic development within a selected neighborhood without necessarily getting involved in the gentrification of that neighborhood. So we don't want to displace those that are impoverished. We want to bring the whole neighborhood up at the same time. And social enterprises have been proven to do that around the world. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bob. You need to go behind.
Good afternoon. So I want to be the first one to tell you today that we love being here at Richmond, and I can assure you, based on my extensive travels around the world, even this year, I've spent time in China, Australia, a lot of time in South Africa and Europe this year. What we're talking about is nothing unusual, nothing unique to Richmond. I talk to cities, mayors, and staffs literally around the world, and what we're telling you is not unusual. And that's why you can be confident that there's a path forward. There's other cities that are going along the same path, and there is an answer, and some of our recommendations should help you move along that trail. So what we said was, Gary was talking about the fact that there's a lot of data. And as I talk to these cities around the world, the one common factor is everybody has data, lots of data. As we talked to all of you, you told us about your data, you showed us your data, you pointed us at data, and if you see the bibliography in our final report, it's got a list of data, right? So be confident that you have the right stuff, right? The question is, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to use it? And one key word that I focused on as a computer scientist, I focused on in the submission, it said tool. I said, cool, I love tools. I love building tools. That's what I do for a living. So I said, how can we develop an approach to a tool that will help categorize the data, get meaningful data to the right people, the right place, at the right time, so they can consume it. So that's what we've done. We've done a little mock-up of what the tool might look at and how an individual user might use it. So this is literally a mock-up, and don't get concerned the fact that we've highlighted something here around Brooklyn Park Boulevard. It's an example of how you might, as a user, as either a consumer, either as a government official, or perhaps even a citizen at some point, be able to take advantage of the data that's available to you. So we've said, as a user, and it could be anybody from the mayor on down to any other user, is interested for whatever purpose, looking at a particular neighborhood. So they would go to a GIS map and literally just click it, and it would highlight a set of custom KPIs. So Gary told us what a KPI is, and it's really just a combination of data. But what we've said is, wouldn't it be good if there was a way to show that our data was not working for us, or that there was a problem with our data, or that the situation was causing a problem? So what we've decided, and has been used in a lot of cities around the world, is basically a stoplight system. Everybody understands stoplights. Green means acceptable. Yellow means caution. Either some of us say, oh, that means speed up, get through the light, right? Or others of us say, oh, critical. This means this is an event I have to look at. This is drawn to my attention. So I should be really clear. These are just examples, right? Nobody get excited. So in economic development, there happens to be a red one here around neighborhood vitality. And was said, neighborhood vitality index is really made up of sets of data. And as examples, we said, so it might be made up of number of sustaining jobs, maybe some commercial zoning information, number of skilled workforce. the bottom line is it's probably going to be made up of much more than that in what really a neighborhood vitality index might mean. But the key point is that there's levers within the data that have been defined by the user of that data that say, oh, when I get commercial zoning and so many houses within this neighborhood have gone to residential versus commercial, that means there could be a problem with me putting new business development in that neighborhood. So let's flag that. So you have the chance to define the levers and the data you want associated with any particular KPI. So, and the system would drive that based on the type of user you are. So, the other thing we saw was that, what I was going to talk about, the other nice thing about KPIs and a system-driven approach like this is that you have the data, both historical data, which is good. It establishes patterns of how things might go given certain behavior within a set of data, which is very important. You have current data affecting what's going on currently against that data. And then given those two, you certainly have the capability to become proactive in your approach. So as you're doing budget planning, as you're doing neighborhood planning, you can do predictive models against this data. And you can say, if then, if this and this, then this is the potential result. So it really gives some viability and credence behind datas and how you're using that data. And so that's an important part of the planning process. As you go back to the citizens, they ask you, why did you decide on this decision? You can say, well, here's the data that was used, and it's not a guess, it's empirical data. You can demonstrate value or a KPI. So the other thing is we certainly looked at and spent a lot of time around the scorecard, and as we viewed the scorecard, we viewed it as a fantastic start to collecting data and collections of data. And certainly at different points, all of us have to produce reports and customized reports, and the system would just lend itself to doing this type of a customized report. You know, call it what you want. If you were looking at within the neighborhood, if you were looking at a skilled workforce, you could get, you know, whatever level of data you wanted to demonstrate to whomever you were demonstrating it to, basically dynamically. And so that's the key part of it. So I think I'm turning it back over to Don.
So with the system as the foundation, we've laid out a roadmap that describes 3 phases on how the city and related organizations could take these recommendations forward. The first aspect of this at the system level is to define the key performance indicators and the data sources and start pulling them together and selecting those critical indicators, right? And I think the balanced scorecard work that you have underway certainly lends itself to that. The second thing is to actually now build the system, design the system, and feed the beast with the data, develop what Gary called the data-driven decision model, right? This is where it turns from data to useful information, and now you're starting to get a flow of the things that are needed for better decision making. And then finally, you know, implementing, testing the system, focusing it probably initially in a few pilot areas, maybe a neighborhood or a development zone. And that's a good way to move forward in terms of getting some real value out of the system. So that's the bedrock of our recommendations, is building the system. The second big thing now deals with the second enabler that Gary spoke of, and that is process and organization. Okay? Now, many of you, and we in IBM, we live in large, complex organizations. Many departments. As companies grow, as public enterprises grow, they get bigger, they make departments. One of the challenges, and we found this throughout our interviews and our listening tour, is there are a lot of groups that really care and are attacking the problems that exist in these neighborhoods. These are not new challenges, right? These are decades-old challenges, and nobody's sitting on their hands. But the question becomes, and you see this in complex systems in nature and business and society, you know, what does the orchestra look like if not everybody has the same sheet music? You see this in nature. Where I'm from in Wisconsin, around September timeframe, September, October every year, you see flocks of geese up in the air, flying around, and they're practicing. And I have young kids, and they say, you know, what are they doing, Daddy? And you see them, and they're working on forming a V, all right? And the reason geese fly in a V, you know, as they're going south for the winter, is they've figured out over time that by getting organized and flying in a V, and somebody leads, and then somebody drops back. You see this in bicycling as well. You'll see this in a couple of years as your big bike race comes to town. It's called drafting, right? It's because the bikers have figured out that's the fastest way to consume the least energy and keep their speed up. What we're talking about here is getting the departments from a city standpoint, but expanding it outside that to the nonprofits, the universities, the college, private businesses, talking about figuring out how to drive that V, all right? We've given you some ideas and some insights about the key leverage points and the indicators. Going forward now, that can be useful for setting priorities in these neighborhoods and getting the various groups to rally their efforts to fly in that V, right? These could be things like, all right, we're going to focus on Brooklyn Park. How are we going to drive more jobs in that area? Well, we got to get the right departments from the city. We got to get the private sector involved. We've got to get the schools involved. We got to get everybody in the V. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. So from a deployment standpoint, the first stage is to actually look at a specific targeted neighborhood and what are the needs in that neighborhood. Once this system is in place, even in a pilot mode, you're going to have information to be in a better position to say what levers should we pull in that Brooklyn Park neighborhood or Hull Street neighborhood or another neighborhood. The second thing then is to actually get the team together and on the same page about the action plan, about the top 1, 2, 3, 4 things we want to do, in the next 6 months to 2 years in that neighborhood. It's about getting organized. And then lastly, use the system, make the information available to these groups so you can actually see if the actions you're taking are having a positive impact. It comes back through the system. If not, try something else, right? It's a continuous improvement process. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Donna, and she's going to take you through the next layer, which is really some tactical recommendations.
Hello, everyone. My name is Donna Johnson. I'm from New York City, but I'm based in Atlanta now. I just want to spend a few minutes to talk about some of our tactical recommendations. You heard about 2 enablers, but just the more tactical. And as you heard, we had 33 interviews. We spoke to 105 people, and we had about over 50 recommendations. And we narrowed them down. And the way we narrowed down the tactical recommendations, we looked at some common themes. We looked at some initiatives and programs that the city already has in place. And then we took a look at, a smarter city decision system, and the intellectual capital that it could provide to the city, and what are some areas where we thought you could see the biggest impact. The first area we looked at is we went back to our focus areas and our leverage points, and we looked at, from a city perspective, one area that we've heard quite often was transportation. And based on reports we've seen, including the poverty report, we do recommend the implementation of the transportation process. Another area that we heard quite a bit was permits. We've heard all over and over again in terms of the desire to have the city streamline and simplify the business permits process. That could hopefully create jobs quicker because businesses can get started quicker. And that means maybe consolidating forms or consolidating departments that are involved. The next area we focused on was education and workforce development. When we say education, we're not talking K-12 because there's lots of people that are focused on K-12, and we couldn't even start in 3 weeks. But we focused on workforce development initiatives. And one thing we realized is that there's a lot of programs currently in the city of Richmond, from the community colleges to Jameson. He has a workforce development initiative in place now, even adult learning organizations. Everyone's doing great programs and activities, and what we did notice is that We call it centralizing, not that we expect to centralize the workforce development team because we know that's not possible, but perhaps the communication or the collaboration. There's power as a team, and we think that as those individual teams work together, they can provide even more success to the citizens of Richmond. We also know in terms of allocating funding that they may streamline the allocation of funds and actually allow you to get more for your money. Also, we talked about was continue to focus on what we call the key high demand jobs. And what we mean by that is not to train individuals to be engineers, but what we call jobs that have a substantial enough income that can support a family. So not just to train for jobs, but for those key jobs. And we wanted to emphasize what we call family supporting training, such as mentorships, support systems, and even soft skills. Now we're going to move on to vitality. An area that we saw was when the areas, as we traveled throughout those 4 neighborhoods, we did see a lot of vacant properties. And we wanted to focus on the neighborhood vitality. We do recommend the city develop a land use strategy. And I'm sure there's already one in place, but again, by taking advantage of a tool and the data and the information and analytics, some areas that came to our attention was the density, parking, fit for use. And what we mean by that is, is the parcel linear? Is it rectangular? How about corners? Maybe we could take advantage of corners. And traffic patterns. Maybe we can, based on traffic patterns, a business that as a drive-through can be successful. So some of the things that we thought of by having that information for the city to make decisions and also to attract businesses to do business in those areas as well. We talked about creative conversion of vacant properties. I know there's a lot of programs in the way for that. But again, by having that data, it could just give you more information to make those decisions. And last, I'll talk about tax incentive financing, the tips and incentives. There's a lot going on again in those areas. One thing a system can do that Bob has spoke about is it actually allows you to help classify those areas. Many of those areas are already classified, but there may be a few others that qualify, and that data can help you get that information. And last, I'll talk about the target incentives. Again, it's about analytics. It's about having the data, and we're hoping that with a system, you will have the data to make sure you invest in the right jobs, the right locations, and also, again, it comes down to allocating the funding in those areas that can prove to be give City of Richmond the most success. At the bottom, I have something about a social enterprise business model. We're going to take a little deep dive into that, but first I want to go to the next slide and we'll come right back to that one. So we talked about this roadmap we have. It all begins about the assessment phase, and then we moved on to the development stage, and then the deployment, and it's about the execution. And execution also includes measuring and tracking your success, revisiting the key performance indicators, and as we said, continue that journey so that Richmond could continue to thrive and continue to be a Tier 1 city. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Gary, who's going to speak on the social enterprise model.
Thank you, Donna. I just have to advance a few slides, and now I'll talk about it. Again, I just want to reiterate that we're not saying that this is a solution, but we do think it's something that should be explored. And a social enterprise is made up of 3 distinguishing characteristics. The first one is that it addresses an intractable social need. Now that could be a neighborhood, that could be a group of individuals, it could be any intractable social need within the need to create it. The second point is that it's a commercial activity. It's not a non-profit organization, it is actually a for-profit organization. And the reason it's a for-profit organization is because it wants to expand its revenue base to do more in terms of addressing the intractable social need. And the third thing is it's for common good. And common good has the basis of what the organization is about baked into its DNA, but it's also owned by a number of stakeholders that are involved in the program. It could be employees, it could be the customers, it could be a whole heap, the city for that matter. Again, we're not saying that this is a solution, but we think it should be investigated, and I've given some examples at the bottom of the page of where it is. In order to do that, you'd need to first explore and identify partners, and that typically would be organizations that are large enough within your community that would be interested in doing something like this. Potential locations and community or business owners. In the developer stage, you would work on your business case, the financing, and you would probably test this model out in one neighborhood, for instance, before moving into and measuring its impact and refining the model and growing. We see this, if you can create a social enterprise that is formed on the basis of a profitable product that is in need in the community, you can then start refining the model to start tackling issues like, you know, a local coffee shop in the neighborhood that people can meet at, or, you know, solving some of the food desert situations that we're aware of out there. Okay, so that's the social enterprise. I want to sort of wrap up with the idea that the smarter decision or data-driven decision model is actually in an improvement loop in its own right. It starts with KPIs, which help you identify the root causes. And that allows all stakeholders to make smarter decisions in terms of proactive interventions and program designs. And these program designs lead to prioritized resource allocation and investment alignment, which allows you to measure success, adjust your KPIs, and the loop continues. So just in closing, I think I speak for all, I know I speak for all of the IBM employees here today to say that we have actually, over the last 3 weeks, fallen in love with this city. We've fallen in love with the beauty, the history, the parks and the restaurants, but I think most of all, we've fallen in love in the fact that everyone we've met has been dedicated and very passionate about making this city great again. And we want to really thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to be a part of this. Thank you.
Mayor, I know that your time may be, so I didn't know if you want to say anything about what we've been up to or not. But on behalf of all of us, we were happy to take some questions, but I did want to defer to see if the mayor wanted to say anything before he had to go.
I'll just take this one. Good afternoon, everyone. And I do want you to have a time for questions and answers, but I did want to take just a moment to express our gratitude to IBM for this wonderful privilege to be a part of a select group of cities that have been able to participate in this program. I feel honored, and we are deeply grateful for that opportunity. So thank you so much to this wonderful team of experts that has come to be with us for 3 weeks, and we want to make them, as of this moment, honorary Richmonders. We heard the report, our executive team heard the report on yesterday, and we felt good about the fact that we're on the road. We're not certainly at the end of the road, but we're on the road in many of the areas that have been mentioned, and we feel good about the suggestions that have been made, that they're on point, and that we can certainly become a better city because of that. I also wanted to recognize Andreas Addison. I'm at that age. Andreas Addison for kind of driving the train and getting us very much involved in this. We went to New York together to IBM to have the announcement of the inclusion of Richmond in this project. So Andreas, job well done. Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of you stakeholders who have participated. I knew that they weren't lying when they said they had had 30 interviews and talked about 105 people when I saw that one of the issues was one-stop shop permitting. I knew that they had been walking the streets of Richmond when that was reported. So thank you so much, and I look forward to, and I know you will have a great Q&A session, but thank you so much for the opportunity to share. Thank you, Sal.
So do we have any questions? comments, observations?
Hi, I'm Bob Crum with the Richmond Regional Planning District Commission. I was just wondering, based on your time here in Richmond, what do you think is the one strength or asset that we could leverage as an economic engine in our city?
Thanks for the question. This is Don. I'll address it first, but I'm sure my colleagues have other ideas. I mean, in terms of a great place to live, the quality of life here is just spectacular, whether it's restaurants, the parks, the bike trails, running, right? One thing that came to our attention that was very unique is the fact, the location being on the port and on the river. And certainly that is a huge advantage for the area and was during the tobacco trade, et cetera, right? So that's an area we didn't go deep on, but from an economic development standpoint, jobs creation, you know, driving more business to the area, that's a geographic feature that not everybody has the advantage of. So that's just one. I'll let others speak as well.
Well, that's actually the one I was going to use. So I did, just to reaffirm that, I did get a chance to live in Europe for a number of years. And if you know, geographically, most European cities are built on rivers. And the economic vitality of that city really is congregated around those rivers. And while you're going there, I know you're talking about things in Chocolate Bottom and other parts along the river. I would really encourage you to look at more development, both, you know, full-time jobs and restaurants and those types of things right along the river. I think that's going to drive a lot of people from the counties, frankly, to come in and make this city a destination. Because that's a lot of what we heard as well, is that there's still some residual thoughts of what downtown Richmond is. And if you make it a destination, people are going to come here, and it's going to make it vibrant.
What I'll add is what I noticed the very first day was how clean your city is. And you make such a great impression for anyone who actually comes into Richmond. It's very clean, and it speaks to the pride of those of you at the city of Richmond. So we actually noticed that when our first ride in our van. Even when we went to certain neighborhoods, which we were told were the impoverished neighborhoods, they were still very clean. And the streets were pretty clean. The people weren't just hanging around. And we actually commented that how impressed we were, but it speaks to the pride that you have in your city. So that's what will always stick out in my mind, and people notice it. So you should be proud of that.
Thanks again. This is excellent. I'm Thad Williamson, University of Richmond. I want to take your invitation to deep dive into the pool of social enterprise and ask you to talk about any particular models you have in mind that you think would be appropriate for Richmond. I know about Cleveland and other cities that have the strong university and hospital base and how they leverage that. What do you think would work for us?
Another great question. I think it starts with need, is my opinion. And, you know, I think however you start the social enterprise, it should be based on what is a need and what can be profitable for both parties. So, you know, I'm not smart enough to suggest in a university, you know, what that could be. But the thing that really interested me is actually when we visited the University of Richmond and we sort of started talking to the president about all of the great work that your students do in the community. And I was thinking that, you know, if you could create a business model, whether that be, you know, and I'm just chucking stuff out here, but, you know, catering or anything like that is a need for the university, then you can get your students involved in the whole process of creating a business and building a business through the community. And you can start them working, you know, from the accounting side to the marketing side to the lawyer side. So I thought that there would be a win-win for a university for sure, but, you know, I can't really say this is what you should concentrate on. It needs to be a need that commercially can be filled by a neighborhood or by a collective group. I mean, a lot of the examples that we've seen have been based on providing services and products that are deemed to be the cleanest service providers around there. So, you know, does the dual role of meeting a need and a commercial need, but also in an economically friendly way. And some government organizations need that to be in place to not give priority to those people, but give them the ability to compete on a level playing field, right? So that's the best answer I can give you. I'm sorry if it's not what you're asking for. Right.
I'm Tiffany John. I probably don't need the microphone. From CMI Consulting. I do run a social enterprise here in Richmond, and our challenge that we're working on is diversity and inclusion, raising the voices of the citizens. It is not a product-based thing, so that makes it a little bit challenging. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for what this smaller organization might do, and ours is entirely service-driven, but how might we affect a change or help sort of everybody fly in a V in a space that's not product-oriented?
Right. Thanks for the question. That's a great question. I think there are some elements that brought us to the conclusion that a social enterprise was worth not only piloting but expanding, and that was jobs creation, right? As I said earlier, there's a number of things that drive jobs. It's active businesses who grow and they have to hire more people, right? So it seems to me any productive city that has a balance of industry, service industry, financials, manufacturing, retail, right? So these social enterprises could take any different types of forms. We said experiment with the business model. It actually should be multiple business models. One element was having core anchor customers. And I don't know if you do in your business, but somebody who's co-invested in the outcome. Like if the university says we need our laundry to be done, they have an ongoing revenue stream out of that enterprise. So there's a reason for the enterprise, like a startup mode, to give them some fuel. If it was a products-based business, maybe it's making chairs or tables for the restaurants in Richmond, things like that. But you have to have that business opportunity. And then the other thing is we want to get people working, right? Remember, at the core of the poverty cycle was, why are you in poverty? Because you're not working. Well, how are you going to work? You got to get a job. Where's the job going to come from? Maybe some social enterprises. That's not going to be the only fuel the jobs engine, but if we can get these people some sense of pride and hope by having a stake in the business, Gary mentioned potential ownership, I think they're going to be that much more motivated to want to work harder, right? Because they can see the fruits of their labors. That's sort of human nature, right? If I work hard at this, I'm going to make a good wage for my family, maybe I can be an owner in the business. And so those are elements that we've sort of talked about as a team, but certainly you're living this in your business, but those are pieces that we saw as important.
My name is Tony Scott, and I work for an organization called Boaz and Ruth, which is essentially, I don't even know how to describe the organization. Okay, very good. The thing that I got out of this today was that I've always thought of social enterprises as assisting our particular clients, per se. I had not thought about it as being focused primarily on commercial. So that gives me something to take back to share with some of the participants, because they feel the same way. All you're doing is looking at the business part of it and not concerned with us. So that was an eye-opener for me. And I'm glad you met with Megan, so I'm not going to say anything else.
Thank you very much.
Kaveen Mathur from Public Works. One of the key findings that you have is lack of data. Have you identified any major data sets or data elements that are not there at all that we should be worried about, and we should have a strategy and a plan for that? Because the smart city decision system would basically feed off that data. And if we do your recommendations have any suggestions for the administration to shift gear and have a big focus on data collection and enriching the data that we have? Thank you.
So I'll give the short answer to that. Like I told you, I'm a computer scientist, and I'd love to lay out an architecture of how you might do this. But at the high level, what we're recommending or could recommend is that you'd probably look at a data warehouse model. And I don't think there's a lack of data. across any of the departments we talk to. Maybe in Public Works, you're going to say, well, I'd like more instrumentation in, you know, this or that line of business, and that may feed into it over time. The world's becoming more instrumented. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think there's a lack of data. I think it's how the data is consumed and how it's divided, and not divided among departments, but divided among tasks, right? That being the key part of it.
I just want to say, as part of being the project manager for this effort, it's been amazing watching one of the key facets of the IBM Smarter Cities Challenge really kind of manifest itself in our city, particularly as it's a civic engagement type led initiative, wanting to go into a city and really bring everyone together. I really want to commend everyone who we've met with who was not able to attend, but also just to thank you all for wanting to participate in your openness and you're willing to be honest and really get them the information they need to have so they can really get to the root of what this challenge is trying to overcome for us. And I really think that it shows kind of the spirit of Richmond to want to do this together and wanting to share what those efforts are, their ideas, their concepts, what they think could be the vision to how we could change this effort. And I really want to say thank you for all of your help in supporting what has hopefully become a great future initiative as we look to implement these wonderful recommendations that are in a huge report I can't wait to receive in August and get my marching orders for how to continue and move forward with all of you moving this forward. So thank you all again. I really appreciate your time today and I look forward to working with you again.